Welcome to the second segment of my talk with Shaun. The first segment wasn't easy, but was really eye-opening in terms of what Shaun went through in his childhood as a 12-year-old, and he shared the events and the context of his suicide attempt at that point, but also a very important point about the wisdom that he had even as a 12-year-old, and which also shows his resilience, as I said in my last segment, about stopping at that moment when he was standing at the lake and thinking of jumping in, but something stopped him. So I think I would like to start this segment with taking that episode forward. When you were standing at the lake, what really happened? What was that thought process when you were all prepared, but then something reminded you of the concert, and you said a lot of positive things in terms of wanting to make a difference, thought about other things that you could try in life rather than taking your life at that point, but maybe even if it meant disappearing or all the other alternatives that came to your mind. How did that happen? That sounds really amazing to me for a 12-year-old to have that wisdom and resilience in that moment.
Yeah. If I'm totally honest, I really don't know how that emerged, but I guess it was I guess sometimes, like, when people try to attempt suicide, there's this automatic, oh, I shouldn't have done this, or oh, I shouldn't have taken all of those pills, or I really need to save myself. It's this kind of struggle to save yourself. It doesn't happen for everybody. And I was extremely lucky for it to happen to me. And I guess it could be that, I'm just thinking of an example of where when we think about really positive things about ourselves, when we say really positive things about ourselves that are kind of outlandishly positive, we automatically have this sort of negative or kind of no, you're not kind of thought. Like, for example, if I say I'm a perfect human being, right? Automatically, I have thoughts about no, you're totally not a perfect human being, and here's why. You're actually really horrible, And then if you say, oh, I'm usually if you say, oh, I'm horrible, the opposite will come up sometimes. Not all of the time, but usually we kind of have this kind of pull of opposites when we go extreme, if that makes sense.
Yeah, true. I think that's the voice within. Something tells you from inside. That kind of comes up when you're trying to do something that you shouldn't, maybe.
Yeah, or that you might regret, or yeah. But so there's that part. So that's in everybody. I think that we have this sort of ability to see the opposite side of what we're seeing, if that makes sense. But when I think about the first thought I remember that was positive was, like I said, what if more days could be like that one? What if we could have, joy like you had that day? And that was the biggest one, I think. But my mind was still kind of giving me, yeah, but right now it's horrible and we can't see, like, or I'm saying we, but it's sort of like these little thoughts in my head battling out. It was sort of like, but I as a human being can't see a future where I can actually have that joy again. Or so I had all these thoughts battling out. And like I said, I linked it back to the make a difference thing. That kind of that was really impactful as well, because it sort of gave me a purpose to move away from the lake, if that makes sense. It kind of made me think, well, I could actually make my life about something completely different.
Mhm.
and about making a difference to other people, rather than it being about, oh, you're gay, oh, you're smelly, or you're this, you're that, you're a terrible student, or whatever thoughts were in my head at that time. It could be about something about making a difference, rather than being about those horrible thoughts I had about myself.
Yeah.
And I think making a difference is such a, to excuse me, to other people, it's such a powerful uh, source of meaning and purpose, that even it came out in my own PhD, that palliative care professionals, for example, when throughout their work, that they kind of report that um, being able to make a difference to others is why they show up at their jobs every day.
Yeah.
And so I can see it in practically, uh, uh, like a lot of people have that desire or need or value or whatever it is, purpose, to make a difference to other people. And I think it was really powerful for me to turn away from the lake, and you know uh, get through the next couple of years,
Right.
um, by linking myself up. Okay, today is horrible. Today is absolutely horrible, and I can't, I can't stand it. But what is my life going to be about?
Mhm.
Um, do I kill myself, or do I, handle or sort of manage the thoughts and feelings I'm feeling um, in this particular time, um, and then and wait for an opportunity to make a difference to other people, if that makes sense.
It makes sense because a lot of people do talk about making a difference. In fact, I was having a conversation with some other survivors of suicide, if you can call it so, or people who have suicidal thoughts. So volunteering comes up a lot in terms of
Yeah,
the positive aspects that they see. And at that point of distress, you may not be really thinking of volunteering or making that difference, but it is something that a lot of people do talk about, not only with regards to suicidal thoughts, but also, like you saw Matthew McQuarrish last time when we, in
yeah,
my talk, with him, a lot of people who've gone through different forms of trauma, like including childhood sexual abuse, they find some strength in service, in helping other people deal with that. And again, in that interview, in that talk, I did say that, it's of course not the responsibility of the person to go out and make that difference, but if that gives you strength and that helps you in some way, then why not? I totally
yeah,
understand what you're saying about that. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. Definitely see that link.
yeah,
But it doesn't have to be making a difference. It could be anything.
yeah,
Uh, you know, I don't know. Maybe I'm trying to think. Um, it can be any sort of value that you have, something that you really care about,
yeah,
can really take you to a different place psychologically,
yeah, yeah,
and help you through that. Um, but yeah, it's totally hard, um, when you feel like how I did, disgusting inside out,
yeah,
to kind of see that there's something you care about that you could probably contribute to.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah,
it's a hard one, so I wouldn't expect everybody to make that connection.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but thankfully I did, and I've often sometimes wondered if I didn't go to that concert, or what how differently would that have played out for me.
yeah.
uh, so that's something that's still like, oh, I could be at the bottom of a lake because I didn't go to a concert. you know
Let's see, that was meant to happen. You were supposed to be sitting here and we were supposed to be meeting and talking about all this and making that difference that you talk about. So
Mm.
that's why the concert had to happen. So
Yeah, it had to happen.
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
It's
But
so funny.
yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
go
just
ahead.
so funny how something that's so like, that might appear so small to somebody,
Yeah.
really did have a big impact on me. Like, it really did. It's just mad.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, no, I think these are things that it's really important to be able to make those connections, that how seemingly now it seems so small, but that was so big. And actually going to concerts of your favorite singers, like Jackson. I remember when I was a child, Bruce Springsteen came to India, and that was like such a big thing. So
Yeah.
obviously, that itself is like can be life changing for sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I've gone to see that singer twice since. So
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah,
so she's still Anastasia is still a singer that I look up to, and yeah,
yeah, yeah.
um,
That's good.
listen
I'm
to.
sure if she listens to this interview, she would know how inspiring she's been. She saved lives.
Well,
Yeah.
potentially.
Yeah, yeah. I think one other thing that drives me home here is listening to this conversation. Although you were so small, but you're still able to make that distinction. One of the myths around, when people talk about suicide, it's that people who are suicidal just want to die. But again, the thing is that I think the majority of people who feel suicidal, they don't really want to die. They do not want to live the life that they have at that point, if that makes sense. The distinction it's seems very small, but it's actually a major thing. It's really important that it's just the life at that given moment that one is living or experiences. You don't want to face that or live that life, but it's not that you really want to die. You just want to go get away from that particular experience. And I guess that's when you're saying about that thought that comes to your mind at that point when you want to take a step, but then there's something inside you, that voice that nudges you and say, no, can you try something else? And it's that point of changing that thought pattern. So you have that thought which is all negative, which is all stressful, which is or you're thinking of all the difficulties that you have in life, but that one moment of that thought, and if you can change that to a positive space like you did, it can change a lot, which I guess I would talk a little more about that as we move ahead and talk about coping strategies for people who are having suicidal thoughts, or people who want to help other people who might be having suicidal thoughts. So these kind of coping strategies that can be helpful, we will go ahead and talk about it. So we will come back to this discussion a little more at that point. But should we move on a little bit and talk about life thereafter? How did you change your life? How did you decide to do the PhD? And where do you see yourself now with all of that? So just kind of moving away from that, not moving away from that, kind of taking the next steps in terms of how your life headed after that experience.
Yeah, I'll just jump back to being that 12-year-old boy again. So for the next 3 years, I stayed in that school, and I played the invisible game, and I had one friend probably, and that was enough for me to really to get me through those 3 years. Invisible, have one friend, right? And then I moved to school after the 3 years, not because I said anything to my parents, because I didn't. It's just because we moved house, and I moved school, and it was very odd for me when I moved school, because all of a sudden I was still playing the invisible game. I was still keeping people at a distance. I still kind of stayed, in the hallway by myself at lunchtime, and but all of a sudden people were coming close to me and not saying anything. Uh, and that was like a shock to me, that, why can they not smell me? Like, what, and people were just reacted to me differently. And it took me, even with that experience, those experiences, I still was playing an invisible game, because it was like a safety net, I think, where I didn't talk. I didn't get close to people and blah blah blah. And I remember there was a picture of us in a classroom, and but I don't know where it is. I wish I did, to show you the how much influence the invisible game had. Where I was kind of standing like this, and everybody else was in a group, and they were trying to get me in to the group, if that makes sense. But I was still like, no, I need that space, I need that distance.
Yeah.
So even those 2 years, it was still on my mind that I could potentially, if people got too close, they could see me, or if people got too close, they could smell that I smelled really bad, or whatever it is. But nothing like that happened. And then I got to university, started to become a little bit more comfortable around people at that point, because it was 2 years after, but still not comfortable enough with them getting too intimate with me, if that makes sense. And then at university, I started to study psychology, which is what I really wanted to do, and it links back up to the making a difference piece, that I just really wanted to make a difference to people who struggled with similar struggles that I struggled with, and but at the same time, I don't think I was ready when I was in university to sort of learn about suicide. In fact, I tried my best not to really engage with suicide research that much, because I knew it was sort of a trigger for me, because I still continued to have, suicidal thoughts come to me every now and then, and sometimes it was harder to let go of them compared to other times. But since that 12-year-old boy, I never really formulated a plan or anything. It was just, or I don't want to say just, but it was I was only dealing with the suicidal thoughts rather than the plans and the thinking about how you're going to do it, when you're going to do it, all of that. And then in university, I started to learn about it wasn't suicide, but it was about acceptance and commitment therapy. And I was just, I just seen how powerfully it kind of connected up with my experiences of turning away from suicide, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because they talk about values in acceptance commitment therapy. They talk about linking up to meaning and purpose in your life, and that really resonated with me. And then they talked about diffusion, and for me that was like a game changer for me. It was like, oh, I can have thoughts about suicide and I don't have to act on it. I can make the space for those thoughts and not have to struggle with those thoughts. So that was really a game changer, and that led me to even doing the PhD with David Galanders, using acceptance commitment therapy to kind of understand palliative care, well-being, and resilience. Palliative care professional well-being and resilience. And I'm still like smitten by the model, and I still use it quite a lot in my everyday life, and using the diffusion techniques. And if you want, I can give a TED talk that Stephen Hayes has done, where he talks about different ways to diffuse from thoughts, where you sing your thought, or you sort of create you say your thought in a kind of your favorite Disney character's voice. But one of the ones that I find useful is the word repetition exercise, where you distill your thought down to a word, and then you keep repeating it. So say at the time, I'm disgusting was one of the things that was coming up. I could just say disgusting, 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 disgusting. I can't like really fast. Disgusting, 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 disgusting. You know, and it sort of gives you that space where you kind of go, "Oh, this sounds funny." Not, and it's not to ridicule your thoughts or anything, but it's just to kind of
give it a different meaning.
Yeah, and a different meaning, and it kind of lands differently on you.
Yeah.
Uh, so that's something I do sometimes. It doesn't work all of the time, and it probably won't work for everybody. But I don't think there is like a one size fits all
Right.
to dealing with suicidal thoughts. But I definitely think that was one that helps me. And there's certain metaphors that I like to think of, and I remind myself of them when I am struggling with something. So one of the metaphors that I quite like is it's sort of like you can imagine your struggle with what that particular thought or that particular feeling as a tug of war with a monster, right? And on one end, you're pulling at the rope, and at the other end, there's the monster pulling at the rope, and in between you, there's this pit, black pit, and you don't know how deep that goes. But as far as you can tell, it goes deeper than you can imagine, right? And so, if you think of your struggle with that particular thought as you pulling at the rope, and the monster pulling you back, pulling you and pulling you back, and the more you pull, the more the monster kind of pulls, right?
Right.
So in that metaphor, I think that's such, I really like that metaphor because it kind of gives you a visualization of what it's like to struggle with a thought. And then it kind of gives you a hint of what you should do in that situation, or what you think your job should be in that situation. And that could be something like maybe it's learning about how to drop the rope. And, the monster might keep saying, here, grab the rope again, struggle with me again, struggle, come on, pull. But you kind of have to learn to kind of say, no, I don't really want my life to be about pulling or that tug of war game. I want it to be about this, making a difference, or whatever it is that you link up to, or that you care about. So that's one of the metaphors I think about sometimes when I'm struggling with a particular feeling or thought.
Right. And I think it's so important you're saying, you're sharing these thoughts and coping strategies, because these are, of course, very useful for people with suicidal thoughts, but also with other forms of trauma, or those repetitive thoughts which kind of walk you down and make life difficult. So these are some really good tips for people to kind of practice them. So if you have other techniques, share that, but also do share the link to the TED Talk that you were talking about. We can put it in the description box and for people to access it. Sometimes I just go black.
So I just kind of want to jump back as well, because I kind of felt like I rushed towards here's my strategies, use them. Acceptance commitment therapy will help you, blah blah blah. I don't really want to say that. I kind of want to take a step back and say, you probably have your own coping strategies, and everybody has their own ways of dealing with thoughts. Maybe it's exercise, whatever it is. Use them if that helps. Definitely use them. But I think tips and tricks will only get you so far so for me, if I was back in that context, if I was back in that world of I'm disgusting from the inside out, and I don't think tips and tricks would have really helped me in that world, because
Yeah.
it was too much for me to deal with. But a particular thought that I have now that doesn't really have much weight, but I kind of still struggle with it. Those tips and tricks are very useful for me.
Yeah.
And also noticing when Mr. Invisible is trying to dominate or trying to dictate where I'm going to go and what I'm going to do. So I think if you're in that bubble or in that world where you just everything's like this, like you're
Yeah.
blinded to everything. I think you really, really need to consider reaching out to a crisis helpline. I think I wish I had access to that. I didn't have access to a phone or the internet or anything back then, but I think people who are watching this surely would have access to those things. Uh, and if you see that your friend is really struggling with it, I think a crisis helpline is a really good starting point to be reaching out to. And they will go through a risk assessment with you, and they will sort of identify whether or not you're imminent risk, or you can they'll help you identify coping strategies that would work for you in particular, as well. So things like I don't know if you might um, uh, share some links, but in Ireland anyway, we have the 50808.ie, I think it's called.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely reach out to them. They will send out an emergency team or an emergency crisis team to you if you really need it. Uh, I'm sure there's others like the Samaritans and
Yeah.
yeah. And maybe part of your journey is to go to therapy. But some people just can't wait on the waiting list. You know what I mean? So definitely, crisis helpline would be useful for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you've said a lot of important things, but a few things that I've picked up is, of course, you've shared about the helpline in Ireland, but also Samaritans you talked about. So in the description box, I'm going to give some of those links. There are some country specific, like in Ireland or in Scotland,
Yeah,
or the other parts of the world, but also there's Samaritans, which is more or less global in different parts of the world. There's a befriending service as well in many parts of the world. So I'll put all those links in. And also I have a manual that I came across on coping strategies. If you're having these thoughts, then I'm going to put a link to that as well. So you'll be obviously in the description box, provide a lot of links to where people can find help. But I think another thing that you had said in in our first segment, and also now, that one is feeling really alone in that moment of despair or confusion or difficulties, worries, whatever we are experiencing in that point of time. But again, for a lot of people, just to share that if you are feeling suicidal, or if one is feeling suicidal, you're not alone. There may be a lot of other people. I say the same thing when I'm talking to people around childhood sexual abuse trauma, that talking about it, sometimes you fear, like, can I talk about it to someone? Can I tell someone about it? Is there something wrong with me? Even people tend to blame someone who's committed suicide or who's attempted suicide, that there was, how selfish they are, just thinking about themselves, or blaming them, or saying that they're mad, or stigmatizing them, saying they're crazy, or they're weak. So again, I would like to demystify that it's not that, even for the person who's attempting suicide, that you're not alone. There are many people out there probably feeling the same, and therefore seeking help or support, as Shaun, you said, is a good option. But also for others who think that these people are being selfish, or they have some flaw or character flaw, that's not true, because they are genuinely in some form of despair, or some kind of, and it could also be some kind of an illness, feeling some kind of disability. It could be coming from a lot of experiences, as you shared, bullying, depression, things like that. So it, in that moment, you are feeling so foggy inside that you can't think beyond that. You can't think of, you can give them strategies, but thinking of other alternatives of coping at that moment may not be possible for everyone. So this is something to kind of understand and empathize with, and offering help whoever needs it, and asking for help if you need it. So I think these are things which are important, which came through your conversation, and also that I see around my work on trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and um, there is a kind of an idea, especially in Ireland. I definitely came across this where people who struggle with mental health issues is they're weak, and at the time when especially when I was 12, it was my if even if I went to her with depression and suicide, she would not have sent me to any professional, because that would have been a sign of weakness.
Yeah,
It's just the way the society was, and it probably still is to some degree. Um, but yeah, and there's this kind of idea, and I really don't like it. That people who attempt, or who self harm, or who attempt suicide, or commit suicide, are just looking for attention.
yeah, yeah,
Uh, that idea is, I don't know.
yeah, yeah,
For me, like, I wanted my suicide attempt or my suicide to look like an accident. I didn't want it to be associated with suicide at all, because that would mean I was weak, my parents were flawed, uh, you know. So I really wanted it to look like an accident. So that's why I thought the lake was. Now I don't know where I was going with the rocks, because that would have been. Oh, I think he was trying to kill himself.
or you collect so many rocks, we just love stones and rocks.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I don't know. I don't know what they would have thought about, like, how did he get in the lake? I wasn't thinking about that. Wasn't crossing my mind
yeah,
at the time, and I didn't even write a suicide note, because again I wanted to look like a genuine suicide, genuine accident. So a suicide note wasn't something that I did. I don't even think I knew what a suicide note was
yeah,
back then, and so it's not something I engaged in. I wasn't looking for attention. I actually wanted to be invisible, like I said. Uh, uh, I wanted to blend into the background, just another dead teenager in the lake.
yeah,
um, uh, uh, but also, um, there was this piece in me that I felt. I touched on it earlier, but I felt like that I was committing suicide to make it better for other people. That my brother and sister won't be bullied, and that kind of thing. And people won't have to be inconvenienced by me sitting beside them, or by me being in the same room as them. So, that was another thing. I really did feel like a burden, and so it wasn't attention at all. Like, it was really about, I feel like a burden, and I feel like I'm going to cause destruction in people's lives by being alive, and that's where I was psychologically.
yeah, yeah. I guess that's an important thing you've said as well. So yeah, it's for people to understand that what the person who tries to commit suicide is going through, and then how can we help them to get over that. And I guess the other thing that we're saying, and while we are saying that yes, it all gets foggy and you're unable to think of coping strategies at that point, but I think listening to you and listening to other people that I work with, the good news is that it's important to realize that you can overcome suicide feelings. Yes, you may have thoughts like you said it yourself. And I think in the next segment, I would like to explore that a little more, where you said, I can have those thoughts, but I don't have to act on it. So it's again a conscious decision that one can make, that yes, if I've had ups and downs in my life. I've had really difficult experiences as a child. And something that we were talking earlier on as well, that does this feeling go away ever? Like, does it come back or in difficult moments again? And if it does, then how do you cope with that, is something again we can talk about in the next segment. But I think I would like to end this segment by saying that yes, you can overcome suicidal feelings. If you have repetitive thoughts, or even in that moment when you think you are going to attempt, there is something inside you, as you said, which tells you, wait a minute, think about it. Are you going to regret it? It's going to be permanent, maybe for a lot of people. If it's successful, it doesn't seem like the right word to say, but if the suicide attempt is successful, then it's more or less permanent. So maybe just taking that step back and thinking about it a little bit might be helpful as a strategy. But do you want to say something, or should we just then move into our next segment, which would be the third segment, and talk a little bit more about coping strategies, talk a little bit more about your life now, and also talking a little bit about, which we haven't done, and if you want to, about your family. Are they aware of it, and how do they react to it? So maybe in the next segment, if you would like, we can talk
Yeah.
about that a little bit, about the social support system, or the social support around.
Perfect. Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, I think that's a good place to end this segment. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Shaun. So I'll see
Thank
you
you.
in our next and the last segment. So to the viewers, again, take a deep breath, reflect on
Yeah,
everything.
you're going to need it.
And we've talked about a lot of different things, and we're leaving this segment on a positive note that we can overcome the suicidal thoughts or the feelings. It is possible. So let's explore that a little more in the next segment. Thank you.